I think it took a year in this part-time setup that we were in to release a stable version.
Marketing and Entrepreneurship, a podcast by Into the Minds, marketing agency in Paris and Brussels.
Send from my smartphones, please apologize any typos. I'm sure you have seen that message already in your emails. My guest in today's podcast wants to get rid of typos on smartphones. I'm very happy to welcome the co-founder and CEO of Typewise, a Swiss-based tech startup. Hello, David Eberle, and welcome.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
Typewise just raised 1 million euros, right, to sustain its growth. Could you explain it a little bit what Typewise is?
Absolutely. Happy to do that. Maybe you haven't wondered why you're typing on the 19th century keyboard, but in fact, that's what most of us are still doing, unfortunately. So the standard QWERTY keyboard that you find on your smartphone was developed for typewriters many, many years ago. And even back then, it wasn't made for fast typing, but it was designed in a way to overcome technical limitations with the mechanics of a typewriter. This technology has not changed, although we don't use 10 fingers anymore on our smartphones, but we use 2 thumbs typically. And so this keyboard leads to a lot of typos. According to a big study from Cambridge University and ETH Zurich, 1 out of 5 words written on smartphones contains typos. Well, you could say, well, typos don't matter, but actually they do. And I think you have also done research on this, right? Typos have a severe impact on your image, how you come across. You come across as professional. So many people then correct their typos, especially in business emails, which then takes a lot of time. It becomes very cumbersome. Also, editing text on smartphones is very, very cumbersome. And in the end, you take a lot of time and you just wish for a smartphone keyboard. That's better. And that's why most people then prefer to use a laptop to write text and not their smartphone. And we felt that shouldn't be the case. But we felt the smartphone should be a place where you feel comfortable typing. And that's what we're trying to do with Typewise.
The keyboard you were mentioning, so the QWERTY or the AZERTY keyboard in a French-speaking scene, that's indeed something that's been around for decades, if not more than 1 century. However, there were some attempts like the Dvorak keyboard back in the days to speed up typing. So why do you think a new keyboard is gonna, and Dvorak was not adopted at all, I think only by geeks and a kind of people. So why do you think Typewise is gonna be adopted, or a new type of keyboard is gonna be adopted?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are probably 2 components to it. One is like the pain or the need for a better keyboard, and on a laptop or computer, the need is just much smaller. I think now we can argue maybe with a Dvorak power user who would say I'm wrong, but most people would probably benefit very little from that faster typing. I think often it's not like we don't copy entire text from like that's pre-written into the computer, but we also spend time thinking about what we're writing. So I think inherently the typing speed is somewhat limited, not just by like the mechanics of our fingers, but also, and the keyboard, but also like our thought process. So that's why I would say the keyboard as it is now on laptops, I think is probably for most people good enough. However, the pain on the smartphone is very different because there it just doesn't work well.
And that's where all the idea from Typewise originates, actually.
Absolutely. So my co-founder, Janice, who approached me one day with the idea of designing a keyboard that's made for smartphones. And he had been actually looking at other keyboard apps. He had this pain himself of always wanting a laptop keyboard as soon as the message got longer than 1 sentence. And he thought about at some point, well, why is it that no, like even Apple that, with all these new touch screens and fast CPUs and all the innovation that has flown into the smartphone, why has nobody thought of the keyboard? When everything else has changed, that from a computer to a smartphone. That's how the idea was born. And very early on, we realized we're not the first ones to think about the keyboard. There have, after Dvorak, there have also been other attempts. So one attempt was a project called KALQ, KALQ, from the Max Planck Institute in collaboration with Aalto University in Helsinki. They have also attempted to rearrange all the keys, and they've actually also brought out a smartphone app. So that was very interesting because their algorithm obviously was open source, like their approach of rearranging keys. And we also had the chance of speaking to the professor who led the initiative. And the feedback was very clear. The feedback was they failed with their approach because the learning curve was very, very high and users were not willing to rewire their brains for the sake of potentially being a bit faster.
And that's exactly what happens with the Dvorak keyboard. You have to relearn everything.
Absolutely. The very first design that Janice developed was with all keys rearranged. But then very quickly, after this initial research and discussions, we then kind of stayed as close as possible to the QWERTY layout in terms of key arrangement. Because what we also found from these models is, well, on a 10-finger keyboard, the physical distance between the keys is quite large. So the keyboard is 20 centimeters in dimension. On a smartphone keyboard, it's much smaller. And the benefit from rearranging keys, one key benefit is that the traveling distance of your fingers get reduced. However, on a smartphone keyboard, the traveling distance anyway is already much smaller. So the saving you get from reducing that traveling distance is just very minor. So we realized, well, this is not really going to help anyone that if we reconfigure all the keys, but it's just going to probably make it impossible for our product to reach a wider audience.
And so do you think that the arrangement of the keys is the source, or the distance between the keys is the source of the errors and the typos that we mentioned in the introduction? Is that the problem?
No, it's maybe a factor of how fast you can type on a 10-finger keyboard. But on a smartphone keyboard, the problem is that the keys are small.
Yeah.
That's the main issue. That's why you have to concentrate on hitting the right ones. You still hit the wrong ones. Then you can pray that the autocorrection is going to do the right thing. And if it doesn't, you have to go back and delete the entire word. And if it was a few words, previous, you have to move the cursor in a very cumbersome way and try to kind of hit that spot in the word that you want to correct. And it becomes very finicky and difficult and frustrating.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but there are autocorrect options right now on all smartphones. So does it still matter to type right from the first time? Or you can just let the smartphone suggest a correction and just adopt it.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So we have also seen since we started, and the first, let's say, kindle of this idea was in 2015. When we started with the research, we developed a proof of concept and then went through the whole phase where when we look today, keyboards in general, and especially those of Google, so the Google keyboard and the Microsoft Swift key, but also Apple, they have improved a lot. So they now, and I think the big change is using machine learning in your autocorrection technology to make it much better. Before, I think it was all hard-coded algorithms that said, well, if this, then that. And it just doesn't work well for an autocorrection. And with machine learning, it has become much more powerful. So we are obviously we don't see ourselves as a keyboard company, but we're a deep tech company. So our primary focus is the underlying intelligence of text predictions, and autocorrection is a part of that. And we are about to release a new version of autocorrection that kind of beats the top players, including Google and co. But to come back to your point, I think if you're still able to reduce your errors in the first place, that obviously helps the autocorrection to make more accurate corrections, because the less typos you have, then the better the algorithm can work off. And the second thing is that sometimes, you also type words that are not known to the autocorrection. For example, in Switzerland, we use Swiss German, which is in no dictionary. You may use names or you may enter strings in many cases, right? When you enter URLs and so forth, there an autocorrection cannot really come in. So I think there are many instances where typing correctly in the first place is very helpful to the user experience.
So you have that initial idea, and your co-founder Janice comes to you with that initial idea. How do you actually move from just having an idea to like validating something that is expected by the market? How did you do that?
The first step was this initial idea with the concept from Janice. The second step basically was some market research. So then what I've mentioned, others have tried it. We spoke to them. We got some feedback that we could refine the idea. We did like market surveys to see how many others actually have a problem with the keyboard and what are the main problems and are we addressing those problems with our solution. Then built a proof of concept on Android to see, is this technically even possible, building a keyboard in such a way? And then once we saw this is going to work, we then decided to launch a crowdfunding campaign on Kickstarter for two reasons. One, to obviously raise some funds and that we can then reinvest in the product, but also to see if there's a market demand. Are people willing to pay for it? And then maybe a third reason was also then to have actual first users. So we're lucky in a way that we got some press coverage also during this crowdfunding campaign, and which really helped us to get those users. So we had about 800 people supporting us. Maybe the first 50 were like, family, friends, and fools. But then the next 750 were genuinely interested people. And then we got this campaign funded with $15K. This allowed us to then develop with a student we hired. We developed then, let's say, a first MVP that a year later we then launched in the app stores and to see what happens.
And it's actually very smart to start on Kickstarter. Not only doesn't bring money, but as you rightly mentioned, it allows you to verify that there is a demand. Because one thing that we have not mentioned, it's not a free app. You can have the app for free, but there is a paying version of it. It's like 29 something, right?
We say the app is free, which is true. There's no trick. You can absolutely use the keyboard with almost full potential, but there are premium features. And you can either pay that through a subscription, which, for example, in the US works very well. So people there, I think, have become very accustomed to paying for software in a subscription model. In Europe, we still see a bit of resistance. So we've also offered a lifetime version. That's 25 euros. Yes. And then you pay one time and you get the premium basically for your life.
And I love it. And then obviously, so when you have the first 800 customers on Kickstarter, today you are at 500,000 downloads, 500,000 downloads, right?
Yeah.
So, big step compared to the Kickstarter campaign. When do you decide actually to start up Typewise for good? I mean, going from a project on Kickstarter to a real registered company, and what kind of feelings did you have at that time?
It took a very long time. The Kickstarter we did in 2015. We then launched the app in 2016. That's when I took also a break from my previous strategy consulting job and did an MBA in Singapore. And we got very nice traction in the first, let's say, week of launching the app. We were, I think, an article on Mac Rumors led to tens of thousands of downloads in a very short amount of time.
Wow.
And there, the app still costs money. I think it costs $2. So the nice thing was it drove some revenue, instant revenue, which allowed us to continue the project. So yeah, we had a big debate. Should we have made it for free back then? Because maybe much more people would have downloaded it. But the product as an MVP, it was just not good enough. Very clear. We launched it on iOS even without an autocorrection. And we said it would have it, but we kind of said it comes with the first update. So this first update didn't come. People were complaining a lot, and then it did come and it had bugs and it was just horrible. I think it took a year in this part-time setup that we were in to release a stable version. I think it was the 1.4 version, which without any new features was, I think, at a point where you could say now it's usable. I tried during my MBA time to raise funds in Singapore. It's like, hey, we have this app, we have tens of thousands of people. I mean, this is cool. I think it's more than just an idea, and we have an MVP, like a working MVP, and we have traction, we have revenue. So this is not like per se, like, a bad story. However, it was, I think the entire app business model was past its prime. So I didn't do a big effort, but the few meetings I had, it was pretty clear, like, yeah, with an app, I'm not going to raise any funds. But it was also clear to us that this product needed serious improvements, both on the usability side and the design, but then also on the intelligence side. Because that's what users expect. That's, as I mentioned, Google Keyboard moved in. I think they launched in 2014. So by then they were already quite big. Apple's, they launched predictions and all that stuff. So that's what users have become to expect. And we didn't have it. So we made a decision in July or summer 2017. So after releasing the stable version, we said, okay, let's not bring out any more updates. And let's build a version 2. And this version 2 then should be, perfect. I mean, it's never perfect, but it should be as good enough to be really launched on the markets. And we continued in that setup because also from a financial perspective, we still had a bit money left from that revenue and, the Kickstarter. And we had previously also a side business which made some profits, and we kind of just had kept those on the side. So it was nice that we had a bit of funds ourselves to invest in the product. We continued in this part-time setup, and it was very, very frustrating. This version 2, a year later, still hadn't advanced much. It did, but it was so much to do. It still seemed like years away. Janice had taken half a year off as a sabbatical, where he also developed his own neural network for this text prediction part. So that was basically ready in autumn 2018. But yes, it seemed just very far off to launch this. And the pivotal moment was actually then in 2018. So Switzerland has a startup program from the Swiss government. I would say a very small program. So you're not really getting much as a startup. You basically get coaching vouchers. And with these coaching vouchers, you can then hire experienced coaches that give you advice, and you don't have to pay for it. But you're not getting any actual cash. But after we had been in this program for 1 year in sort of an initial acceptance phase, as they call it. And then in later 2018, we had a pitch. So we had a pitch with a committee of industry, let's say experts that then join this government committee once in a while to make decisions on startups. And we had this pitch, and there we got accepted into this larger coaching program, or that's the full coaching program. And for us, this was, I think psychologically, this was huge because it was the first time that some third party actually believed in us, and not just by saying, oh yeah, you're great, but actually giving us something for it. That was a huge boost because before we had only kind of received a bit rejections or question marks. But there it was really, we made it to the next level. And their condition was, they basically said, look guys, if you do want to bring this to the next level, you obviously need to go full time. If you don't do this, then you can forget about anything else. I mean, you will not raise funds. You will not make this a big thing if this is a part-time project. And then in 2018, in October, we said, okay, let's try this full time. We hired then some professional developer at the beginning of 2019 because we said, if we want to be full time, we also need to have the product ready because basically the concepts are all ready. It just needs to be implemented. So we hired someone, which we then paid out of our own personal funds. So we then invested basically ourselves, and we then went full time in October 2019.
How did you feel at that moment? I mean, investing your own money and not the money of others, is it difficult?
No, I think, well, it does hurt a bit after a while. I mean, the good thing is you can do this on a monthly basis. So basically every month you can make a decision, do I pour in more or not? So I think it's not this big commitment that you take at the beginning, but it's more a gradual commitment. It also was helpful to me as a, coming from strategy consulting, which is maybe known for, I mean, they obviously pay good salaries. You also work a lot, but I think that allowed us to use part of my income, and I didn't have to use my savings for it. So I think that's why the commitment wasn't that, like, it wasn't like a big risk. Obviously, you then have to make like a cut somewhere else and maybe not do the luxury vacations, but I think that was fine. So I think from that perspective, this actually worked out well. Going then full time was, the challenge there was that I have a family with, then we expected our second child. The good thing is with my co-founder, we have been working together for a long time. We are also good friends. So we basically made an agreement saying while he had to quit his job, I took a sabbatical for 6 months with the option of going back to my employer if it doesn't turn out well, because, so I can feed my family, essentially. We found an agreement that was good for both, and we just wrote it down. I think that was important, so that you don't have discussions 3 weeks later. Oh, yeah, but now I'm doing this and you're not working enough, or I don't know. We always felt, let's write it down so that we both as co-founders, we know exactly where we stand. And even if things become difficult, it doesn't start impacting our personal relationship. And I think that was a very good choice of being upfront, very clear of what we both expect, and then align with that expectation.
Well, that's a good tip. Yeah. So fast forward now to the scale-up phase. As we mentioned, you just raised €1 million. There was one question that I want you to ask you. So you reminded us of your time in Singapore, where you pitched and had not very much success in raising money at that time. And then suddenly, there seems to be traction, at least from investors. But at the same time, so we have all the smart speakers wave coming in and people saying, well, writing is dead. A few years from now, you will just have to speak and everything will be converted to text with speech to text. That seems like kind of contradictory, right? What was traction coming from for investors? Why did they suddenly believe in you?
I hope that the keyboard dies. In the end, it's horrible to use your fingers to basically communicate. I think there are much more direct ways, if you think about the brain-computer interfaces, that eventually will kill the smartphone. So for us, the vision really is about connecting minds with machines, which means how can I bring the information that I have in my brain into the digital world? And yes, now I do this by typing on a keyboard, but in the future, I probably do it directly through thoughts. And in that process, so we're not a hardware company, we're a software company, but in that process, you need the software to interpret those signals into information. So it needs to be able to perfectly interpret the intent of the user. And that's what we believe text prediction technology, this will be at the core of this interpretation. Really understanding what are you trying to say, and then if the output is text, right now the output is always text in emails, in the messages, in like form fields, in wherever. It could also be directly metadata in the future. But you need this technology to understand this is basically what we're building. And now the interface of this technology is the keyboard, because that's the way we interact with our devices today. But in the future, it's probably no longer the keyboard, but the technology will still be part of that future solution.
That's the vision that you sold to investors, right? Okay.
Absolutely. And the way to achieve this vision is, yes, you can do this through directly having a product for the end consumer, such as an app. I think that's probably then the larger play. You can license your technology to other software companies that also have an interface to the user.
So you just raised that €1 million. How difficult is it actually to manage financial and human resources aspects when you're scaling up?
The financial part, I would say it's the easy part. In the end, you just need to be structured. And then, the rest is easy. So I think it's also, helpful to work, very operationally, that you have an accountant and not do it yourself, so that the books are all like 100% clean, to have an auditor to make sure that everything is kosher and is correct. I think that's just like a hygiene factor. And obviously you need to have a view on your remaining cash. And I've heard stories of companies realizing like a month before they go bankrupt that they are going bankrupt. But I think then something went wrong. And I think it doesn't take like that much effort to do it.
That's called mismanagement, by the way.
Yeah. I mean, the problem is most startups at this stage don't have a CFO. So basically the CEO is the CFO, which is still probably like a 1 day per week role, if you think about it. And it's something that's not, at least for me, it's not so much fun. But you have to do it. And it's also not generating business. And that's why I feel this clinch of internally facing things versus externally facing things. I think that's always the difficult part. But if the internal stuff doesn't work, and I think HR is the bigger topic, then all the other people in your team become unproductive. So this is a bit as a CEO, if you have this double role, I think it's always a matter of building a solid foundation within the company that everyone else is productive and being, let's say, productive yourself in your external role as maybe, like a leader in sales or of marketing or of fundraising or of public relations or of whatever you do as a CEO. So that's, I think, the clinch. And I think HR is probably more important because in the end, I think at this stage, it's really about having the right team. And I think great people can build great things. So I think my role, obviously both co-founders share this role, is to get the right people and also retain them. This is difficult, especially I think the retention part you may overlook and say, oh, now we have the people in the team and let's just work. And it's easy to, maybe not do that feedback talk after 1 month or not talk about the development needs of others or kind of forget things and say, yeah, but now we have this marketing campaign and this is more important. Let's postpone the other thing. This can wait. And then if it waits too long, then maybe, there's people become unhappy. If that happens, I think no matter how many great marketing campaigns you did, then the company may fall apart. So I think HR is super important. But again, the challenge is how do you balance, let's say, business building versus company building? And that's obviously my biggest balancing act that I have to take.
So your software, your deep techs, where do you find the right people to support your growth, especially developers?
In Zurich or in Switzerland, we have the advantage of having ETH Zurich, which acts as a great talent for deep tech people. And also EPFL in Lausanne for the more French-speaking part. But both schools are very international. ETH is ranking among the top of engineering schools globally. So for us, this is very helpful. We also have Google here with a big presence, Microsoft with a big presence, Facebook with a big presence, which is not always great because they obviously take the talent away. But there is talent in Zurich in this field, and it's really the top talent globally. I think this is an advantage we have from that regard. For the developers, on the other hand, we tried Switzerland at the beginning because we thought, like for everything, we thought, let's have it locally. It's nice to have a team here and to be able to have a drink, and it's easier to interact on a physical level. But we just realized it's not possible. So we have our app development team in Belgrade, Serbia, which I think like a lot of Swiss startups have their teams there. So there's a whole ecosystem with companies managing your staff, but they're still your staff. But just from a legal perspective, you don't have to deal with social security and so forth. So this has actually worked very well. And then for other roles, we first also thought, well, let's at least do the other roles in Switzerland. We at some point started recruiting Europe-wide. And the way we do that, we use AngelList, for example, for like marketing roles. And I didn't expect anything good would come in, but actually we found our VP of growth through AngelList. We had a huge recruiting process also through LinkedIn. And now we use a lot of LinkedIn ads where we also specifically look in other cities. So I put a LinkedIn ad in Berlin because I know maybe there are good people in Berlin for this specific role, or Amsterdam, or Barcelona, or you could even look in London. Right now, I think with the whole situation, this is anyway, people work remotely. And I think this is the way to go. So I think now we have reached a stage where we say we always look Europe-wide if we expect good talent to be in a specific location. And I think this has worked out fantastically.
Okay, so you spoke about now recruitment, which makes a nice transition to speak about the future of Typewise. So where do you want to bring Typewise in the future? What are your objectives in the next 3 years, for instance?
My bigger objective or like business objective is to ultimately let's say, touch 1 billion lives with our technology. And this could be through a smartphone app, through a keyboard app, or more likely, it will be that our technology is just part of a lot of other applications and making it easier for the user to interact with that specific application. If we achieve this in 3 years, probably not on a year plan. This takes time. For the next 2 to 3 years, we want to do very concretely. Obviously, now we have some funds, but I think it will take a bit of time until this business becomes profitable. So we will now need to plan for the next fundraise, which will be a Series A, probably sometime next year. Then on the technology side, while we have now worked very much on this autocorrection part, I think the next step will be on the predictive or like the word completion part. And the goal there is not to just give people specific words, but maybe entire sentences. And really, depending on the context that you're in, to actually make a big difference using AI versus typing manually in a generating text. And then the question is, how do you bring this to market? So obviously, we continue working on the keyboard app. The goal is now we've 500,000 downloads. The goal is to obviously generate 10 times as many downloads over the next, let's say, 1 to 2 years, but also to improve the way people use the app after like 1 day, after 30 days, how many people then pay for the premium. So we would obviously like to increase this share, which would help us to pour more money into the development and the scale up, and also to start working with businesses, with licensing partners, with partnerships, maybe with OEMs directly, with smartphone manufacturers. So I think there are many options. And I think now the next 6 to 9 months, we kind of have to narrow down these options and say, okay, what are the real growth drivers for the next 2 to 3 years? And this is something I think between a seed and a Series A stage, this is what you have to figure out.
Well, that all sounds like a plan and like a very amazing future. So thank you very much, David, for taking the time to be on that podcast with us. I would like to remember that you are the co-founder and CEO of Typewise and that you just raised 1 million to sustain your growth. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
If you liked this episode of Marketing and Entrepreneurship, don't forget to subscribe. See you soon.